Tonight we're going somewhere deeply uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable the way a Victorian sewer is uncomfortable, or a medieval battlefield, or a plague hospital. No. Tonight we're going somewhere that looks from the outside like the most desirable place in all of England. A palace. A court of silk and gold and music and power. The kind of place that men spent their entire lives scheming and bribing and marrying their daughters into just to get a seat near the door. And right in the centre of it, closer to the king than any man alive, performing a duty so intimate and so specific that it cannot be described in polite company, is you. You hold the most powerful job in England. You also hold the royal chamber pot. Both of these things are true at the same time, and the tension between them is going to define every single hour of your life for as long as you manage to keep the position. And in the court of Henry VIII, as long as you manage is a phrase that carries a particular kind of weight, the kind that keeps you awake at 4 a.m, listening to the sounds of the palace, and trying to calculate whether what you said 3 days ago could be interpreted as treasonous. We're going back to 1536, the year the world changed, the year that Anne Boleyn's head left her body on a Tuesday morning in May, the year that Thomas More had already been dead for a year, and Thomas Cromwell was still riding high, and the king was fat and increasingly dangerous and surrounded by men who would do absolutely anything to stay close to him, because staying close to him was the only way to survive. I make these history stories, and honestly, the thing about this one is that it's the kind of story where the horror is invisible. There are no plague pits tonight, no gallows, no open sewers bubbling in summer heat. The horror tonight is the kind that wears velvet, the kind that smiles, the kind that fills your goblet personally and asks after your father's health, and then signs a document that ends everything before the wine is even cold. Get comfortable, you're going to need it. Here we go. Your eyes open in darkness, not the lazy darkness of a sleepy morning, where consciousness floats back gently and your body takes its time deciding to rejoin the day. This is a snapping awake darkness, the kind that comes from training yourself over months of this job to wake before the bells ring, because the bells give you exactly 7 minutes, and 7 minutes is not enough. Your body knows. Even before you're fully awake, you're already moving. The room is cold. Hampton Court in October is always cold before the fires are lit. And your room, not a grand room, but a real room, a room that 50 men at court would have stepped on each other's throats to occupy, faces north, which means the morning light comes late and the frost on the inside of the window glass takes until mid-morning to melt. You can feel it just lying there, the air on your face, the way the cold has worked its fingers under your blanket during the night and settled against your skin like a second sheet made of ice. Your name is Edmund Neville. You're 23 years old. You're the second son of the Earl of Westmoreland's cousin, which means you are connected to the nobility without quite being of it. A distinction that matters enormously in 1536 and that has shaped your entire life up to this point. You are not rich. You are not poor. You are exactly the kind of man who can be given an important position at court without threatening anyone who matters, and who can be removed from it without anyone losing much sleep. This makes you useful. In the court of Henry VIII, useful is what you want to be. What you are specifically is a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, and in 3 months, if the current groom of the Stool recommends you and the king approves, and nothing goes wrong, you may be elevated to the position that everyone at court pretends to find distasteful, while privately fighting for with everything they have. But that is 3 months away, if it happens at all. Right now, you have 7 minutes. You sit up. The straw in your mattress shifts and crackles beneath you. It's good straw, replaced regularly, which is itself a marker of status. In the servants' quarters below, men sleep on straw that hasn't been changed since summer. You can smell it when you pass their corridor. Yours smells of clean hay and the cedar blocks your mother sent with you from home to keep the moths away. And underneath that, always the faint scent of the river that runs beneath Hampton Court's foundations, damp and cold and ancient. You swing your legs to the floor. The boards are bare and they are cold, that immediate biting cold that travels up through your soles and into your ankles before your body has had any chance to object. You have learned not to flinch. You have learned, in fact, to perform not flinching until it becomes actual not flinching, because the Privy Chamber is a place where every expression on your face means something, and a man who flinches at cold floorboards is a man who might flinch at other things. Your clothes are where you laid them, not dropped on the floor, not bundled onto a chair, laid properly in order, the way Sir William taught you in your first week. When you dress in the dark, Sir William had said, and he was the current groom of the Stool, a man of 50 with grey-streaked hair, and eyes that had been watching court politics for 30 years and showed it. You dress in the dark quickly and correctly, because the king does not wait for men who cannot manage their own buttons. You dress now by touch. The linen shirt first, slightly stiff with cold, the fabric clammy against your skin until your body heat begins to warm it. The padded doublet, deep blue velvet, the colour that Sir William chose for all the gentlemen of the Privy Chamber, so that the king's eye can find his attendants without effort. The buttons are brass, and they catch the faint grey light from the window as you work them, one by one, your fingers slow at first and then faster as the blood comes back into them. Hose, shoes, already clean, because you clean them yourself every evening. Another thing Sir William insisted on, because a man with dirty shoes in the Privy Chamber is a man who cannot be trusted with anything. The chain. Last. You wear a light gold chain, not an elaborate thing, just the indication of your rank, and you settle it around your neck by feel, its weight familiar now, a reminder each morning of what you are and where you are. You are in the most powerful court in England. You are 19 steps from the king's bedroom door. You have 6 minutes. The corridor outside your room is dark, lit only by the residual glow of a torch that burned down hours ago. The stone walls are cold to the touch. You don't touch them. You've learned not to touch them, because there's always a faint trace of damp that transfers to velvet and shows under candlelight. But you can feel the cold radiating from them as you walk. The rushes on the floor muffle your footsteps. Good rushes, better than you'd find in most of the palace, sprinkled with lavender and rosemary that release their scent when compressed underfoot. You notice this every morning. It is one of the small mercies of the Privy Chamber corridor that you have come to value in ways you never expected. 2 other gentlemen are already in the antechamber. Robert Carey, who is 26 and has been here 2 years, and knows every stone of the palace, and sometimes seems to know every thought of every person in it before they think it. And James, who is just James, because everyone calls him that and nobody remembers his family name anymore, which is probably how James prefers it. James has the kind of face that disappears into crowds. James has been a gentleman of the Privy Chamber for 11 years, which is longer than anyone else currently serving, which tells you something either about his extraordinary political skill or his extraordinary insignificance, and you have not yet determined which. They nod at you. Nobody speaks. There are ears in Hampton Court, figurative ones and sometimes literal ones. The thick stone walls and the way voices carry through the floorboards and the number of people whose entire livelihood depends on information. Silence in the corridor is policy, not rudeness. Robert Carey tilts his head toward the inner door. His eyebrows ask the question. James gives a small shake of his head. Not yet. You take your position. This is the thing that nobody outside the Privy Chamber understands. The thing that would seem absurd if you tried to explain it to your cousin at home or your younger brother who is currently studying at Oxford. You take your position and you wait. That is the job in its simplest form. You wait and you are ready. And when you are needed, you move without hesitation. And when you're not needed, you continue waiting. The antechamber is about 12 feet square. A fireplace on the north wall, unlit at this hour. The fire will be laid and started the moment the king wakes, not before, because the smoke and the sound of it could disturb his sleep. A tapestry on the east wall showing a hunting scene, boars being chased through stylized forest. The colours slightly faded from years of smoke and lamplight. A long bench where you and the other gentlemen sometimes sit and sometimes don't, depending on the hour and the mood of the chamber, and 3 high-backed chairs that are specifically for men of higher rank than you, which is to say most people who might visit this room. You stand, your back is straight, your face is settled into the particular expression that you've spent months perfecting, the one Sir William calls present attention, which is not quite alertness because alertness implies tension, and not quite calm because calm implies inattention. It is the expression of a man who is fully available without being demanding about it. You practice it. Sometimes at night, before sleep, you hold it in the darkness just to feel it in your muscles. The bells ring somewhere in the distance. Inside the Privy Chamber something shifts. You can't hear it. Or rather you can, but you're not supposed to be able to, and the fact that you can is simply a result of having stood outside this door enough times that your ears have trained themselves without your permission. A sound like bedclothes moving. A sound like the particular groan that a man of 44 makes when the ulcer on his left leg has been pressed against the mattress at the wrong angle all night. A sound. And this is the one that really matters. The one that James and Robert are listening for too. You can see it in the slight forward lean of their bodies, like a man settling his weight into wakefulness. The king is awake. Robert moves first, not to the door, never to the door until the signal, but to the small table against the wall where the morning items are arranged. The basin and its matching ewer of water, filled last night, and left to come to something approaching room temperature. The linen cloths, folded in precise squares. The small box containing the implements that will not be needed for another quarter hour, but which need to be in their place before anything else happens. James moves to the fireplace. You move to the door and knock. 3 times. Soft. The knock you've been taught. A pause. Enter. The voice of Henry VIII at 6 in the morning is not the voice you might imagine. Not the booming proclamation voice. Not the charming hunting party voice. Not the laughing with his counsellors voice. At 6 in the morning, in the private darkness of his bedroom, Henry's voice is simply that of a very large man who is in some degree of pain, and would prefer not to be awake yet, but has been awake already for an hour, because the leg never lets him sleep past 5, and who needs assistance that he would prefer to receive efficiently and without commentary. You open the door. The smell hits you first. It always does. You've been doing this for 4 months and the smell still hits you first. not unpleasantly, or rather, not in the way you initially expected. The smell of the royal bedroom at Hampton Court in October 1536 is complex and layered in ways that took you weeks to fully catalogue. Wood smoke, always, from the fire that burned through the night. Beeswax from the dozens of candles that stand in their holders around the room. Most of them burn to stubs that will be replaced before the king rises fully. The dry, sweet smell of good tapestry. The royal chambers are hung with the finest pieces in England, wool and silk woven in Brussels and Antwerp. Hundreds of pounds spent on colour and craft that now serves mainly to keep the wind off the stone walls. The slightly musty underlayer of old rushes, which are changed here more frequently than anywhere else in the palace, but are still rushes, still organic matter in a room occupied by a large man who spends a lot of time in it. And underneath all of it, threaded through everything else like a dark note in a piece of music, something that you identify after 2 weeks and try not to think about after that. The smell of the king's leg. The ulcer that has been troubling him for years, that refuses to heal, that the physicians dress and dress and dress again and still cannot cure. Not overwhelming, not in truth as bad as it might be. The physicians are diligent and the dressings are changed regularly and the herbs packed against the wound are fresh. But it's there. You know it. You will always know it. It is the smell of a powerful man's vulnerability, and standing in this doorway knowing that you know it, and that he knows that you know it, is one of the more complicated experiences of your daily life. Good morning, Your Majesty. The king is in his bed. It is an enormous bed, the headboard carved and gilded, the hangings made of crimson silk that has been worked with gold thread into patterns of lions and Tudor roses and fleurs-de-lis. The French designer left over from the days when England still claimed France, which was always more aspiration than reality, but nobody has been foolish enough to suggest removing the fleurs-de-lis. The mattress is thick enough that the king appears to be sitting, when he is in fact lying, propped against bolsters that the night attendant arranged before he slept. Henry VIII in the morning. You see this every day, and you are still not entirely prepared for it. He is 44 years old, and he has been king for 27 years, and the weight of that, both the literal and the figurative kind, is visible on his body in ways that the portraits commissioned for public consumption do not fully convey. He is large. He has always been large in the way that powerful men of this era tend to be large, broad-shouldered, thick-necked, the body of a man who in his youth could joust and wrestle and dance for hours, and who still, even now, retains the bone structure of that youth under the layers that the years and the rich court diet have added. His face is still striking. The blue eyes, pale and very clear, that can turn from warmth to calculation in the time it takes to draw breath. The red beard gone auburn grey now, carefully trimmed every morning by the barber who comes after you have finished. The lips that can curve into a smile so genuine and warm that you understand, seeing it, how he has gotten through his life charming people into doing what he wants. He is not smiling now, he is assessing. This is what Henry does in the first moments of every morning. He wakes and he assesses the room, the light, his attendants, the state of his leg, the state of his mood, and the state of the world as it presents itself to him in these first private minutes before the machinery of kingship begins its daily operation. He does this quickly, with a thoroughness that most men with the same leg and the same accumulated weight and the same mostly sleepless nights would not be capable of. He sees you, Neville, Your Majesty. Cold this morning. Yes, Your Majesty, the fire will be burning directly. He nods. This is the exchange you have every morning that is similar to this one. Not a requirement, not a ritual exactly, more a kind of testing of the air. Is the king in pain? How much? Is he rested? Is there news from the night that has already reached him through channels you don't know about? You read it all in the quality of those 2 syllables of your name. Today, the leg is troubling him, not badly, middling. He slept somewhat. There is no particular mood to navigate yet. You move. The thing about moving in the Privy Chamber, the thing that took you longest to learn and that Sir William spent the most time on, is that you must be efficient without appearing efficient. A man who moves efficiently looks like a servant. A man who moves too slowly looks negligent. What you must appear to be is simply present, as though your hands find the right things by instinct, as though the preparation of the morning basin is happening naturally in the way that things happen around the king, as though the washcloth is simply there, warm and folded and ready, 'cause where else would it be? You carry the basin to the king's bedside. The water has been standing for 6 hours and has reached something between cool and cold, which is what Sir William specified. Not cold enough to shock, not warm enough to soften. The king's mornings require clarity, not comfort. The basin is silver, heavy in your hands, its base etched with the royal arms. You set it on the small table that stands by the bed, the table that exists for this exact purpose, no higher and no lower than the king's hand when he sits up. He sits up. This is the moment you've been working toward without obviously working toward it. The sitting up. The king's left leg as he moves it. The way he controls his expression against the pain that the movement causes. You see it. The fractional tightening around his eyes. The breath held for a half second. You do not see it. You are looking at the basin, adjusting something that doesn't need adjusting, giving him the privacy of his own face in a moment of difficulty. This is the job. This is actually the job, beneath all the titles and the silk and the political weight of the position. You give the King of England the privacy of his own face. You witness his physical weakness and you pretend you haven't. You know more about the state of his body than any man in England except his physicians, and you hold that knowledge locked away, never referenced, never hinted at, never used as currency in the conversations that happen in every corner of this palace between men who are trying to understand the king's health and what it might mean for their own futures. You know that the ulcer on his left thigh has spread approximately 2 inches since August. You know this because you have helped dress it on 3 occasions when the physician was unavailable and Sir William directed you to assist. You know the smell of it up close, which is different from the diluted version that fills the bedroom, more immediate, more biological, the smell of a wound that is fighting a battle it cannot quite win. You know that he winces most sharply when he first sets weight on the leg in the morning, less so after he's been moving for half an hour and the joint has had time to warm. You know that on the days when it is worst he becomes quieter, that the particular silence of a man managing pain is different from the silence of a man thinking, or the silence of a man angry, and that knowing the difference could, in theory, save your life. You hand him the cloth. He takes it, presses it briefly to his face. You can see the muscles of his jaw working beneath the beard as the cold water hits. He is not a man who shows what he feels except when he is, and those are 2 different modes that require 2 different kinds of attention from the men around him. He hands the cloth back. You take it, set it aside, move to the next thing. The mornings at Hampton Court have their own architecture. You have been here long enough now to know it in your bones. The sequence of small actions that constitutes the waking of a king, the particular choreography of it, the way each element leads to the next with a logic that is partly ceremony and partly practicality and partly simply habit, accumulated over decades of the same men doing the same things in the same rooms. Robert Carey has the fire going now. You can feel the heat of it beginning to reach across the room, slow and generous. James has withdrawn to the outer antechamber to prepare the next stage. You are here, in the room, close enough to the king that you could reach out and touch him, and you are invisible. Functionally invisible, required but unremarkable, present but unobtrusive, as essential as the air in the room and as unnoticed. And it is this invisibility that contains everything. Because the men who are visible at court, the men who stand in the great hall and declaim their opinions and press forward at banquets, and make sure their velvet catches the light at the right angle and laugh loudly at the king's jokes, so that everyone can see how easily the king speaks with them. Those men are performing for an audience. They are selling a version of themselves to anyone who will buy it. You're not performing for anyone except the king himself. And the king, in this room, at this hour, is not watching a performance. He is watching you. Not overtly. Henry does not peer at his attendants with the suspicious intensity that you might expect from a man who has executed multiple wives and advisers and friends. His surveillance is more ambient than that, more like the awareness of a predator that does not need to look directly at something to know exactly where it is. He knows you're here. He knows exactly what you're doing with your hands. He knows the quality of your attention and the nature of your presence in a way that should be impossible for a man who is simultaneously managing his own pain and thinking about affairs of state and whatever else occupies the mind of Henry VIII before his breakfast. He knows, and this is why the job is coveted. This is why the Earl of Westmoreland's actual son, the legitimate heir, the firstborn with the title and the estates and the full weight of the family name behind him, spent 2 years trying to secure a position in the Privy Chamber and failed, while you, the cousin's second son, the negligible one, the one nobody quite remembers to invite to the important dinners, managed it through a combination of circumstances too complicated to fully explain, and a well-placed letter from Sir William, who was your mother's friend's husband's cousin, which is exactly the kind of connection that sounds ridiculous from the outside, and is everything from the inside. You are here because you are nobody in particular. You will matter because you are here. Those two facts will spend the next several years in productive tension with each other. An hour. By the time the first real business of the morning is completed, an hour has passed. Outside the narrow windows of the Privy Chamber, the sky has gone from black to grey to the particular washed-out pale blue of an October morning with clouds. The kind of light that makes everything look slightly unreal, as though the world hasn't quite committed to being awake yet. The king is dressed. This has taken 40 minutes on its own, not because Henry is slow. He's not slow. He moves with a deliberateness that is different from slowness. But because dressing the King of England in 1536 is not the work of minutes. There is the underlinen, the shirt, the hose, the doublet with its 47 buttons that must be done in sequence because the fabric bunches if you start from the bottom. There is the gown, heavy brocade lined with sable fur, that adds so much weight to his silhouette that watching him move in it is like watching a building decide to change rooms. There are the rings, 8 of them, distributed between his hands in an order that he has maintained for years, and that varies only when he is given a new ring, and must decide where it fits in the hierarchy of gems and metals. You do not dress the king, not yet. That is Sir William's work, with assistance from Robert Carey. Your station is still, for the moment, slightly to one side of the most intimate actions. You hand things, you receive things, you anticipate needs and meet them in the half-second before they are expressed. But you watch. God, you watch. You watch the way Sir William moves around the king's body with the confidence of a man who has done this for 11 years and knows every inch of the routine. The way he anticipates the lift of an arm or the turn of a wrist without being told. The way he speaks when he speaks, which is rarely, and only on topics that are specifically relevant to the physical business at hand. If your Majesty would allow the left sleeve, and never, ever offers opinions that were not requested, or observations that reach beyond the immediate task. You watch the king watching Sir William. This is the other thing that nobody tells you about the job. The intimacy runs in two directions. The king knows his attendants in this room in ways that he cannot know the men who see him only in public. He has watched Sir William age. He knows Sir William's knees trouble him in cold weather because of the way he descends to adjust the royal hose. He knows that Robert Carey has recently been worried about something because Robert's hands have been very slightly less steady than usual for the past 2 weeks. He knows you, Edmund Neville, are still learning, can still be watched, and that the watching is a form of evaluation that has no fixed endpoint. There will be a moment when the king decides you are trustworthy, or there won't. And the difference between those two outcomes will determine the rest of your life. The privy chamber smells of the morning fire and the king's breakfast, which has arrived while he was dressing. A covered dish of meat, bread, a cup of wine diluted with water because Henry does not drink strong wine before mid-morning on most days. There are also eggs, hard-cooked and shelled, which the king likes to eat with his hands, a preference that is a small private rebellion against the ceremony of public meals, where everything must be presented and carved and tasted for poison before he can eat. In the privy chamber he eats with his hands. Outside, in the public dining spaces, the King of England eats in a performance of royal dignity that involves 12 separate officials and a taster and ceremony that makes the act of consuming food into something closer to a liturgy. In here, he peels an egg with his thumb and eats it in 2 bites and wipes his hand on the napkin you're holding before he's quite finished swallowing. You hold the napkin. You receive the shell. You do not blink. Sir William, Your Majesty. The king's voice has warmed somewhat. Food helps. The fire helps. The leg has had time to settle into the morning's routine of aching rather than the sharper displeasure of first movement. Henry in the second half of his morning is a different creature from Henry in the first half, and the change is one that you track in real time, adjusting your own posture and expression, and the quality of your attention accordingly. The council meets at 10. Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Cromwell has already been informed. A pause. The king picks up a piece of bread and tears it. The sound of it, that particular dense tearing sound of bread made from good flour in the royal kitchens, is very loud in the quiet room. Cromwell, the king says, just that, just the name. You do not look at Sir William. Sir William does not look at you. James, standing near the door, does not look at anyone. The name hangs in the air of the privy chamber, the way a name like Cromwell in 1536 will hang, carrying everything it carries. The executions of the past year, the dissolution of the monasteries, ongoing, contentious, profitable. the investigation into the alleged treasons of Anne Boleyn, which Cromwell had managed with a thoroughness that some called brilliant, and others called something else entirely, in private, in whispers, in the kind of conversations that happen in corners of gardens when one is very certain no one is listening. Henry says nothing else about Cromwell. He finishes his bread. He drinks his wine. And then he sets the cup down and looks out of the window at the grey October morning. And whatever he's thinking remains, as it always does, entirely his own. This is what power looks like from inside. Not the proclamations, not the ceremonies, not the moments of public display that the portraits and the histories will focus on. Power looks like a large man eating an egg with his hands next to a fire and thinking about something that no one in the room is allowed to know, while three men stand at various distances holding various things and performing the intricate dance of perfect availability and perfect invisibility. This is your life. You would not trade it for anything. The thought surprises you sometimes. It surprises you now, standing here with the napkin and the eggshell, watching the king watch the window. You were sent here by your father, who saw the opportunity in the letter from Sir William and understood it even if you did not, who packed you up and sent you south with instructions that amounted to, be useful, be quiet, don't embarrass us, and try not to die. You did not want to come. You had plans, or the beginnings of plans. A friend in York who had talked about a business venture, something with wool or timber or both, something ordinary and comprehensible that existed in a world where you understood the rules. You had a girl you thought about sometimes, not seriously, the way young men think about girls when they're not yet thinking seriously about anything. You had a life that was taking shape, slowly and without much drama, in the north, where the air was cleaner and the politics were less likely to kill you. And then the letter came, and your father called you into his study, and by the end of the conversation you were going to London. The first month was the worst. You knew this from other men who'd been through it. The first month is always the worst, when everything is unfamiliar and the rules seem impossible to learn, and the constant performance of composure, while simultaneously absorbing an enormous amount of information about how the court works, and who is allied with whom, and what the protocols are and why they matter, and what happens to men who don't follow them. The first month feels like drowning in very expensive water. Sir William was not unkind. He was precise. There is a difference. He did not raise his voice or berate you when you made errors. He simply showed you the correct version of what you had done incorrectly and expected you to do it correctly thereafter. If you failed to do it correctly thereafter, he showed you again, with perhaps a slightly longer pause before he began, and you understood that the pauses were counting, that there were a finite number of them, and that what came after the final pause was something you did not want to see. You did not often require a third correction. The political education was less systematic and more necessary. Hampton Court in 1536 is a place of extraordinary complexity, a social and political ecosystem that has been evolving for 20 years under a king whose tastes and alliances and appetites have all shifted dramatically across that time. The men who thrived in the court of young Henry, the athletic, jousting, pleasure-seeking prince of the 1510s, are not necessarily the same men who thrive in the court of Henry of the mid-1530s, heavier and more suspicious and increasingly capable of violence directed at the people closest to him. This is the fact that sits underneath everything else at Hampton Court in 1536. In the last 2 years, Henry VIII has executed his Lord Chancellor Thomas More, who was by most accounts one of the most decent men in England, for refusing to swear an oath. He has executed Bishop Fisher, who was old and frail and posed no physical threat to anyone. He has executed, or rather caused to be executed, his second wife, Anne Boleyn, mother of his daughter Elizabeth, a woman he had moved heaven and earth and the entire ecclesiastical order of England to marry. He has not stopped there. He has reached into the households of the condemned and executed their friends, their relatives, the men accused of being Anne Boleyn's lovers, at least some of whom were almost certainly innocent. The mathematics of this are simple and terrible. The king's favour is the only real currency at court, and the king can take it away at any moment, for reasons that need not be explained to anyone, with consequences that are not merely inconvenient. This is why you stand here, holding a napkin, with your face arranged in an expression of pleasant, quiet attention. And this is why 100 men who could have this job, who have more title and more connections and more wealth than you, would have it if they could. Because this room is the only safe place in England, and it is safe only as long as you make it safe, and the only way to make it safe is to be so perfectly, consistently, invisibly useful that the king could not imagine his morning without you. So you stand, you hold the napkin, you watch the window, and you wait for the day to begin. It begins, as most days begin, with the arrival of Lord Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell does not arrive the way most men arrive. Most men, even great men, arrive at the door of the Privy Chamber and are announced and wait, while the announcement is delivered, and then enter when permission is given. There is a protocol for this, a specific sequence involving the gentleman of the Privy Chamber at the door, who is currently you, and the spoken formula of introduction, and the king's acknowledgement. Cromwell does not wait. This is not rudeness, technically. It is a demonstration of a specific kind of access, the kind that has been granted rather than assumed, the kind that other men at court watch for and catalogue and resent. Cromwell has the right of entry to the Privy Chamber that most men would spend their careers working toward, and he exercises it regularly enough to make sure everyone knows he has it, but not so regularly that it starts to seem like something the king might consider reasserting control over. He is very good at this. You have watched Cromwell for 4 months now, which is not long enough to understand him fully, but is long enough to understand certain things. He is 51, or possibly 49, the exact date of his birth being one of many things about his early life that remains somewhat unclear, perhaps deliberately so. He is the son of a blacksmith from Putney, which is the kind of origin story that in Henry VIII's court is simultaneously impossible and irrelevant. Impossible because men of that background simply do not rise to be Secretary of State and Vicar General and the effective Chief Minister of England, and irrelevant because he is those things regardless, and the impossibility of how he got there does not make the facts of where he is any less real. He's not physically a particularly imposing man, medium height, a face that is heavy around the jaws and forehead but quick in the eyes, always quick in the eyes of a man who is processing 3 conversations simultaneously while appearing to focus entirely on one. He moves efficiently, he speaks efficiently, he does not waste ornament. Your Majesty. The bow is precise, the exact depth required. Not a hair more, which would look like sycophancy, not a hair less, which would look like presumption. Cromwell. The king's voice is warmer now than it was an hour ago. Sit. Cromwell sits. This is also notable. The king does not offer chairs to men he is displeased with. The chair means that this morning's conversation will be a real one, A working conversation, not a performance of one. You take 3 steps back, not out of the room. You don't leave the room when the king has a visitor. Your job is to be available in case something is needed. But to a position that is clearly outside the conversation, clearly not listening, clearly engaged with the small business of straightening something on the side table that does not need straightening. You listen. This is another thing nobody tells you before you take this job. You will spend an enormous amount of your time listening to things you are not supposed to be listening to. This is not espionage. It is not deliberate eavesdropping. It is simply the physics of the room. You are 12 feet from the king and his chief minister, and the room has stone walls and good acoustics. And there is a limit to what distance can do when 2 men are speaking in normal voices about affairs of state. You hear things. What you do with what you hear is the most important decision you make, over and over again every day. And what you do with it, what every successful gentleman of the Privy Chamber does with it, is nothing. You hear it. You understand it. You file it in the part of your mind that is reserved for things that exist only in this room, in this context, belonging to these men. You do not repeat it. You do not trade it. You do not let it show on your face. What you hear this morning is not in itself alarming. It is about the monasteries. Cromwell has figures. He always has figures, delivered from memory in a voice that carries the particular confidence of a man who has checked his figures multiple times and knows them to be correct. The dissolution proceeds. 3 more houses in Lincolnshire have been visited and assessed. The commissioners found such and such. The revenues are expected to be considerable. There are some complications in Yorkshire. Resistance from local landowners who have benefited from relationships with the monasteries in ways that make them reluctant to see those relationships ended. The resistance is being managed. Henry listens. He asks 2 or 3 questions that are precise and well-informed. The questions of a man who's been attending to this matter closely and remembers what he was told previously. Cromwell answers without notes. And then the conversation turns to something else, something you don't immediately recognize. A name, not an English name, something that sounds continental, and the phrase, the emperor's position, and the word alliance, spoken with a particular care, and then lowered voices. You straighten the item on the side table that did not need straightening and move to a position slightly further from the conversation. You have learned, in 4 months, that there is a point at which knowing too much is as dangerous as knowing too little, and that the distance between those points is not always predictable. You're very carefully not listening to the rest of the conversation, which is when the door opens without the prescribed knock and Lady Jane Seymour's brother walks in. Edward Seymour is 29 years old, and already, at 29, a man who inhabits rooms with the ease of someone who has decided that rooms exist to contain him rather than the other way around. He's handsome in the calculated way of men who know they are handsome and have made peace with using it. He carries himself with the confidence of a man whose sister became queen in May, 8 days after the previous queen's execution, which is to say the confidence of a man who has every reason to feel that his star is currently at its apex. He looks at you. He looks through you. Your Majesty. The bow is deep, the bow of a man who is demonstrating that he knows the depth required and has chosen to exceed it, which is a different thing from the precision of Cromwell's bow and carries a different message. Edward Seymour's bow says, "I am entirely at your service. I place everything I have at your feet. I am your most devoted servant." It also says, In the language of men like Edward Seymour, something that is almost its opposite. I can afford to bow this deeply because I'm not afraid of anything you might do to me. The king receives it. His expression does not change visibly, but you have spent enough time reading that expression to see something. Not displeasure, not exactly, but a kind of noting. The king notes Edward Seymour the way he notes everything, storing it in the vast interior archive that drives his counsellors to distraction, because nobody is ever quite sure what is in there. Lord Seymour. The king does not tell him to sit. This is not the time I expected you. I beg your majesty's pardon. Smooth, practised. I received word that the council meeting had been moved. I wish to confirm. A pause. This pause contains a small amount of political information. Cromwell's eyes, in your peripheral vision, have settled into the particular stillness of a man who did not tell Edward Seymour that the council meeting had been moved, and who is now wondering who did. At 10, the king says, as planned. Of course. Another bow. Your Majesty's servant. He withdraws. The door closes. The silence in the room after Edward Seymour's departure is of a specific type. Henry stares at the door for a half-second longer than he stares at most doors. Then he looks at Cromwell, and Cromwell looks at the king, and something passes between them that is entirely without words, and that you could spend the rest of your life trying to pass. Where were we? The king says. Not a question. Cromwell tells him where they were. The meeting continues. You breathe. Outside the Privy Chamber, the palace is waking up. You can hear it through the walls. The particular sound of a large household in its morning phase. Hundreds of people moving and speaking and carrying things and opening doors. Hampton Court in the 1530s has a population of several hundred in permanent residence, and many more who flow in and out depending on the season and the king's movements and the calendar of court events. There are the great officers of the household, the Lord Steward, the Lord Chamberlain, the Comptroller, each with his own staff and his own domain of the palace's operation. There are the various departments, the kitchen, the bakehouse, the pantry, the buttery, the spicery, the confectionery, each staffed by men who have their own hierarchies and their own politics and their own daily rhythms that operate largely independently of the political drama happening 50 yards away in the royal apartments. There are the courtiers, the men and women who are at court not because they have specific roles in the household machinery, but because court is where power lives, and if you're not near power, you cannot benefit from it, and if you cannot benefit from power, you might as well be in Yorkshire. And then there is the Privy Chamber, which is not exactly a room, though there is a room called that. It is more accurately a zone, a concentric circle of access, the inner ring of what the court is organised around. The outermost ring is the Great Hall, where anyone of sufficient status might go. Inside that, the watching chamber, where the king's guards stand and where visitors wait. Inside that, the presence chamber, where the king holds formal audiences and where men of rank can present themselves and be received. And inside that, the Privy Chamber itself, the private rooms where the king eats and sleeps and moves and thinks, where access is granted by specific appointment, where the men who have it are the men who, in functional terms, run England. Because the king is the centre of everything. Every decision of consequence requires his approval. Every appointment, every execution, every treaty, every law. The Privy Seal and the Great Seal and all the machinery of English government exist to execute the royal will, but the royal will must first be formed, and it is formed in conversation, in the private moments when men with access to the king can make their arguments before anyone else can counter them, can plant ideas in fertile ground, can shape the way a question is framed before the question is ever asked in council. This is why Cromwell, with his right of entry, is the most powerful man in England after the king. This is why Edward Seymour, with his new prominence, his sister's queenship, his careful cultivation of every relationship that might get him further inside, is already manoeuvring with the energy of a man who sees where the centre of gravity is and intends to be as close to it as possible. This is why your job, which involves among other things helping the King of England perform his morning ablutions, is the most coveted position in the land. The ablutions. We should talk about the ablutions. The morning stool. You've had 4 months to come to terms with it, and you have largely come to terms with it, in the way that human beings can come to terms with almost anything, if they approach it properly and understand its context. The thing is, it's not what you expect before you've done it, or rather, it is what you expect in terms of the basic biological facts of the matter, but it is entirely different from what you expect in terms of its character, its weight, what it actually is when you are inside it rather than imagining it from outside. The Privy, which is adjacent to the bedchamber, is a small room panelled in linen fold oak. There is a padded chair, the Stool, which gives the groom of the Stool his name, over a shaft that runs down through the palace walls to the garden. There are clean linens, always clean linens, pressed and folded, and there is a water vessel, and there is a small window that lets in what light there is, and there is the smell, which is what it is, and which you have learned not to register on your face. When the king requires the stool, which happens each morning and sometimes once more in the afternoon, he is accompanied by the groom, by Sir William currently, and occasionally by you. You wait, you provide what is needed. You empty the vessel when it's done. This is not described as servile. It is described as honour. And here is the thing that took you the longest to understand, that seemed most paradoxical when you first heard it explained and that now seems obvious. It is honour. Not in spite of its intimacy, but because of it. The king allows no one to be this close to him except men he trusts absolutely. The intimacy is the trust. The trust is the power, and the power is real. 3 months ago, a man you had never heard of, a merchant from Bristol, substantial wealth, newly knighted, with ambitions for his family that required a title he did not yet have, spent £700. You learn this through the particular network of information that exists in the Privy Chamber corridor, the quiet exchanges between gentlemen who are, in theory, telling each other nothing. £700 paid through intermediaries to secure the recommendation of a man who had access to Sir William, in the hope that Sir William might mention to the king, in one of these private morning moments, that this particular merchant was deserving of consideration. £700. Your father's estate earns perhaps £120 in a good year. The merchant did not get his title. The recommendation was not made. The £700 vanished into the ecosystem of court patronage and left no visible trace except as a lesson that you have filed carefully away. The value of access to this room is such that men will spend fortunes trying to buy a fragment of it, and they will not always succeed, and they will not always know why. The morning passes. By the time Cromwell takes his leave, which he does with the same efficient precision with which he does everything, the morning is well advanced. The king's mood has settled into something that reads, to your now trained eye, as satisfied. Not happy. Henry's happiness is a complicated animal that doesn't often appear in its pure form, but engaged. The business of the state is proceeding in ways he finds acceptable. The leg is not worse than yesterday. The October light through the Privy chamber windows has strengthened slightly, the clouds thinning enough to let through something approaching sun. Walk, the king announces. This is a word that sets 3 men in motion simultaneously. Robert to the door to clear the corridor to send word to the outer chambers that the king is moving. James to the great gown which has been warming near the fire. You to the king's right side, your position for any movement through the palace, close enough to be useful, distant enough not to crowd. Walking with the king is its own education. The palace opens before him the way water parts before a ship. Not dramatically, not with ceremony at this hour, but definitively. Men who are moving in the corridor change direction. Men who are standing still press themselves toward the wall, their expressions going through the rapid calculation of whether to bow immediately or wait to see if the king's attention settles on them. Most choose immediate bow. It is safer. Henry walks the corridors of Hampton Court with the deliberate pace of a man who is accustomed to having space made for him, and who is also, this morning, managing the leg with the particular care of someone who knows that each step costs something and that he must budget those costs against the distance he intends to cover. You watch the pace without appearing to watch it. You walk slightly behind and to the right. You do not speak. The corridor leads to a gallery, and the gallery leads to a door that opens onto a covered walkway overlooking the gardens. The air here is cold and sharp, the smell of it entirely different from the Privy Chamber. Clean in the way that outdoor air in October is clean, carrying dead leaves and wood smoke from somewhere distant and the faint mineral sharpness of the river. Henry stops at the edge of the walkway and looks out at the gardens. Hampton Court's gardens in October. The formal beds have been put to sleep for winter, the herbs cut back, the paths between them clear. The topiary, the strange sculpted shapes that Henry has had crafted from yew and box, fantastic animals and geometrical forms that strike you as both impressive and faintly absurd, stand in their places, their green still vivid against the stripped brown of the surrounding beds. Beyond the formal gardens the river is visible, grey and moving slowly, its surface ruffled by a wind that has not reached you here. The king looks at his garden. You look at the king. You see a large man standing in October light with his hands clasped behind his back, and you think, you cannot help but think, it comes to you unbidden in the way that thoughts do when you have too much time to think them, that this man has remade England, has broken with Rome, has dissolved the monasteries, has executed his chancellor and his wife and his friends, has married 3 times, and is currently married to his 3rd wife, who is carrying, everyone hopes, and God willing, the male heir that everything else has been in service of producing. This man standing here looking at dead flower beds, and you are standing 3 feet behind him, having just spent an hour and a half helping him begin his day. Neville, your Majesty, your father's estate, Northumberland. It is not a question. The king knows where you're from. Yes, your Majesty, near Alnwick. Good country. He doesn't look at you, still looking at the garden. Harsh country. Men from harsh country tend to last longer than men from soft country. I hope to justify your Majesty's confidence. A pause. Sir William tells me you're learning quickly. Your heart does something embarrassing that you control immediately. Sir William is generous, your Majesty. Sir William is precise, the king says. He is not generous. He is precise. There's a difference. He turns then and looks at you. The pale blue eyes, the assessment behind them. Can you be precise? I believe so, your Majesty. Then be precise every day without exception. He turns back to the garden. That is all. You understand that this is a significant conversation. You understand it the way you understand most significant things at court. Not immediately, not fully, but in the way that meaning accumulates, that what was said and what was meant and what will happen, as a result of it, become clear over the hours and days following, accreting layer by layer like sediment until the shape of it is unmistakable. The king has spoken to you, not about business, not about a task. He has spoken to you the way he speaks to men he is beginning to consider. You breathe very carefully and do not allow your face to do anything. The morning walk lasts 20 minutes, then back inside, back through the corridors, back to the Privy Chamber and the day's official business, which begins with the arrival of the rest of the council and the preparation for the 10 o'clock meeting. You will not be in that meeting. The council meets in the council chamber, not the Privy Chamber, and your presence is not required there. Your presence is required later, when the king returns and needs something after the meeting, and in the gaps between the official duties when there are things to be done that require a trusted hand. What you do in the interim is wait, and in waiting, in the antechamber outside the Privy Chamber while the palace moves around you, you watch. Hampton Court at mid-morning is a different place from Hampton Court at dawn. The corridors are busy now, full of men and women on their way to various obligations and conversations, carrying messages and petitions and gifts and the invisible currencies of information and influence. The great departments of the household are in full operation. From somewhere deep in the palace's lower levels you can smell the kitchens, a warm compound of roasting meat and baking bread and wood smoke and hot fat that drifts upward through the building like a benevolent ghost. Men stop near the antechamber door. They stop and they look at the door and they look away, and their look carries everything it carries. Calculation, envy, desire, caution. They want to be on the other side of that door. They want what the men inside that room have. They want the particular safety of being close enough to the king that the king's anger, when it comes, will reach them last if it reaches them at all. Because that is also part of the calculation. That is the other face of what you have. The king's favour is the sun in the court of Henry VIII, and like the sun, it is essential for life, and like the sun too close and it will destroy you. The men who have been destroyed, Moore Fisher, the men charged alongside Anne Boleyn, Cromwell's predecessors who reached for too much too fast, they were all in their ways too visible, too prominent, too clearly invested in a particular outcome, which is another way of saying too clearly invested in something other than the king's own wishes. The art of surviving in this court is the art of never wanting anything more than you want the king's satisfaction, or at least appearing never to want anything more, appearing always to be entirely, peacefully, completely content with whatever role you've been given, however small, because the role the king has given you is the role the king wanted you to have, and that alone makes it exactly right. You are practicing this now. You are practicing it in the antechamber, standing with your hands at your sides, your face in its proper expression, watching the traffic of the palace corridor and wanting nothing and planning nothing and being, as far as anyone who looks at you can tell, precisely what your position requires you to be. You're Edmund Neville, gentleman of the Privy Chamber. You're nothing more than that. You're certainly not a young man from Northumberland who's been in this palace for 4 months and has just been spoken to by the King of England in a manner that suggests the next stage of his career might be approaching faster than he thought. You're not thinking about that. You're not thinking about anything except whether the king will need anything when he returns from the council meeting. You're very good at not thinking. It's an hour past midday when the trouble starts. You hear it before you understand what it is, a particular kind of sound coming from the direction of the council chamber. Not shouting, because men don't shout in the king's presence, but something with the quality of raised voices contained by rigid propriety. The sound of an argument being conducted in the tones of formal address, while the content of it is anything but formal. Robert Carey comes through the door from the outer corridor with a particular expression that means information is incoming and needs to be processed quickly. "Seymour," he says quietly, stopping beside you. He said something about the monasteries in council, something about the pace. Cromwell contradicted him. "In front of the king." You look at him. Directly? Indirectly, but clearly. This is not good, or rather, this is potentially very bad, depending on which of the two men the king considers to be correct, and depending on Henry's mood at the moment the contradiction occurred, and depending on a dozen other factors that nobody in this antechamber has any way of knowing. The council meeting ends sooner than expected. Footsteps in the outer corridor, multiple men, the sound of controlled dispersal. Then the door to the privy chamber opens and the king enters. You see it immediately, the quality of his silence. There is a silence that Henry carries when things are going as he wishes. It is an expansive silence, comfortable, occupying the room without pressure. There is a silence he carries when he is thinking, working something through, which is more contained, focused inward. This is neither. This is the silence of a man who is angry and who has decided to be angry quietly rather than loudly, which is in its way more frightening than the loud version, because the loud version has a clear shape and a predictable resolution, while this version is formless and could settle in any direction at all. Sir William appears from somewhere. You're never entirely sure where Sir William materializes from. He simply appears when he is needed, and takes a position. Robert and James adjust theirs. You find your place. The king sits. He does not speak for a long time. The fire in the privy chamber has been built up and the room is warm, warmer than the rest of the palace. The heat of it, something you feel in the back of your neck and the tops of your ears. Outside the window, the October afternoon is getting on, the light going golden and then bronze and the shadows lengthening across the garden. "Wine," the king says finally. You move. The wine is there, has been there, red burgundy in a silver cup. You carry it to him. You do not hand it to him the way you would hand something to another man. You present it at the angle that Sir William demonstrated on your first day, the cup below the level of the king's hand so that he takes it upward rather than having it thrust at him. He takes it, he drinks. He sets the cup down on the arm of his chair and stares at the fire. You are very still. This is a moment where the wrong move, not necessarily a wrong action, but the wrong quality of presence, the wrong density of attention, the wrong angle of your body, could shift what happens next. You have seen this with Sir William enough times now to know, when the king is in this particular state, the men around him must calibrate their own stillness with exceptional care. Too still, and it reads as fear. Not still enough, and it reads as indifference. What is required is the comfortable, unhurried stillness of a man who has nowhere else to be and no desire to be anywhere else. You breathe. You are here, you are present, you are ready. The fire crackles. Outside, a bird calls once and is answered, and then is quiet. And then Henry says, not to anyone in particular, not to any of you specifically, speaking in the tone of a man who is making a statement to himself that happens to be audible. Edward Seymour is ambitious. A pause. Men should be careful about being ambitious where I can see it. And that is all. He picks up the wine cup again. He drinks. He sets it down. He says, "Sir William, I'll hear some reading this afternoon. Something historical." "Of course, Your Majesty. Which period might please you?" A consideration. "Rome," the king says. "The later Republic. The Gracchi." He has not chosen this accidentally. The Gracchi were two brothers in the Roman Republic who were killed for being too popular with the people and too threatening to the established order. This is either a reference to what just happened in the council chamber, or it is a message to the men in this room, or it is simply the king reading his own mood and choosing history that rhymes with it. With Henry, often it is all of these at once. Sir William sends for the book. "You stand at your place and do not think about Edward Seymour, who is somewhere in this palace right now, recalibrating his understanding of where he stands, and you do not think about Cromwell, who is somewhere else in this palace drawing his own conclusions, and you do not think about what it means or what it will lead to. You think about nothing. You're very good at nothing." The afternoon is long and quiet. The reading, one of Sir William's gifts, is a reading voice that manages to be both clear and somewhat soporific, exactly what is required for afternoon readings in royal chambers, proceeds through the history of the Gracchi brothers with a steadiness that eventually produces in the king a state that is not quite sleep but is something adjacent to it, a resting alertness, the body settled and the mind somewhere in the middle distance. You stand. Your feet have been standing since dawn. This is a thing about the job that you are not prepared for and that Sir William mentioned in the abstract, but that had no real meaning until you experienced it. You stand for most of the day. Not walking. Walking would be a relief. Walking engages different muscles and provides movement. You stand, stationary, for hours at a time. Your lower back begins to speak to you somewhere around the 4th hour of any given day, a low persistent commentary that you've learned to acknowledge and then set aside. Your feet, by afternoon, are simply a fact that you manage rather than something you feel. The trick is weight distribution, shifting it so gradually and minimally that the shift is invisible, but over the course of an hour moving from heel to ball to outside edge and back, in a rotation that keeps the blood moving without requiring any observable movement. Sir William is remarkable at this. You have watched him stand for 6 hours with the stillness of a man who has been there for 10 minutes. His secret, he told you once and once only, is thinking about things. Not worrying, not planning. Thinking specifically about things that are interesting. You give the mind something to do, and the body accepts its role as infrastructure. Today you are thinking about the Gracchi, about the specific quality of the king's attention as Sir William read about them, about the relationship between what a king reads and what a king does, about whether the history Henry VIII reads shapes his decisions, or whether his decisions lead him to the history that confirms them, about what Edward Seymour said in the council chamber, about what Cromwell did, about the word ambitious in the king's voice, about whether in this place at this time you are being precise enough. Evening arrives the way it always does at Hampton Court in October. Not gradually, but in a sudden loss of light as the sun drops behind the buildings to the west. The windows going from gold to grey in the space of 20 minutes, candles appearing in their sconces and the familiar pattern of firelight and shadows taking over from the daylight the room has been running on. The king's evening is different from his morning. Dinner. The king dines formally in the evening, in the presence chamber, with his household arranged around him in careful hierarchy, takes 2 hours. You're present for the preparation and the early stages, and then you are released briefly, while the senior gentlemen manage the formal dinner. This release is not a significant amount of time, perhaps 40 minutes, perhaps an hour if dinner runs long. You use it to eat. The gentleman's table is in a room off the upper corridor, a room that is modest by the standards of the palace but comfortable, with its own fireplace and a table large enough for 8 that usually holds 4 or 5 men at various times during the day. Tonight it's you and Robert Carey and a man called Fletcher, who is a gentleman of the outer chamber, and whom you see mostly at meal times, and who is, as far as you can tell, an entirely unremarkable person in every respect, which may be his most remarkable quality. The food tonight is a piece of boiled capon and some bread and a dish of something roasted that involves turnips. It is not royal cuisine. It is not intended to be. It is fuel, the kind of food that people who work hard and stand for long hours need in order to continue working hard and standing for long hours. You eat it without ceremony, sitting on a bench with your elbows on the table, the candle between you and Robert guttering slightly in the draught from the window. "Seymour," Robert says quietly, not looking at you, looking at his food. You chew, swallow. "I heard." "Cromwell's position is stronger than it looks," Robert says. "It's been stronger than it looks for a year. The monasteries are Cromwell's project, which means the revenue is Cromwell's achievement, which means the king needs it to succeed. Seymour is pushing against something that the king needs to succeed. The king might also need Seymour. The king needs an heir. The queen provides that. Seymour provides the queen, which is a different kind of leverage." Robert tears his bread. "But leverage based on family relationships is conditional. If the queen delivers the heir, Seymour becomes indispensable. If she doesn't," he doesn't finish the sentence. "Neither of you has any way of knowing, sitting here in October 1536 eating boiled capon, that Queen Jane Seymour will give Henry his long-desired son in October of the following year, and that 12 days after the birth she will be dead of puerperal fever. That Edward Seymour will survive anyway, will eventually become Lord Protector of England during his nephew's minority. That Cromwell will be executed in 1540, brought down by a marriage he arranged for the king that Henry found intolerable in more than one sense. You don't know any of this. You eat your capon and you think about leverage and you wonder, not for the first time, whether any of it, the careful positioning, the cultivation of access, the management of relationships, the whole elaborate apparatus of survival that this court requires, is actually possible to maintain indefinitely, or whether the ground is simply too unstable, the king too unpredictable, the consequences of failure too total. You think about Sir William and his 11 years, and then you think about the men who didn't last 11 years, the men whose names come up in the Privy Chamber corridor sometimes, referenced with care as examples of things that can happen. "Are you nervous?" Robert asks. The question is unexpected. Robert is not usually direct. "About what specifically, you say?" "About all of it." He looks at you now. His face in the candlelight is older than 26, has the particular worn quality of a face that has been performing composure for years and is, right now, in this moment, briefly not. "Because I am nervous. I have been nervous for 2 years. I have been nervous since Moore died, and I understood what that meant." You set down your bread. "I understand it," you say carefully. "Do you? I mean, do you actually understand it? Not in the abstract, in the body. In the way you can't quite sleep some nights because you've been going through everything you said or did in the last week and looking for mistakes. You look at him. Yes, you say. Something in him relaxes marginally. The particular tension of a man who didn't know if the person he was about to be honest with was safe. The job is worth it, he says. I'm not saying it isn't. The access, the position, what it can become. Yes, worth it. A pause. But I want to be honest about what it costs. Sir William seems all right, you say. Sir William has been doing it long enough that it's become his natural state. Robert picks up his wine cup. I wonder sometimes if that's better or worse than being nervous. The question doesn't have an answer you can give tonight. You drink your own wine and think about it and let the conversation rest where it's fallen. And Fletcher across the table eats his turnips, and if he has heard any of this, he gives no indication. Which is either because he is the most discreet man at court or because he genuinely has not been listening, and you have long since stopped being able to tell the difference. Dinner in the presence chamber ends, and you go back. The evening routine of the Privy Chamber is the inverse of the morning, the same tasks in a different order, and with a different quality of attention. The King's day is winding down rather than gearing up. The tempo is slower. Henry is tired. Not in the way he'll admit, not in any visible way, because the King is never tired in ways that suggest vulnerability, but in the way that bodies tell their truths regardless of what the mind decides. The movement's slower, the silences longer, the preference for quieter voices, lower lights. You prepare the night chamber. This is in part your responsibility. You and James working together, making the Privy Chamber ready for the transition from day to night. The evening fire built up, the night candles placed and lit, the bed in the inner room prepared by the night attendants, the basin and fresh linens ready for tomorrow. The King reviews some documents, signs his name with a pen that you have sharpened to the exact width he prefers, a fact you know because Sir William showed you on your first week, and you've maintained it since without being reminded. Henry's signature in 1536 is large and decisive, the letters of his name pressed firmly into the paper, the underlining stroke sweeping. He signs 12 documents in the time it takes you to adjust the candle twice, and then the day is over. Or not over. The night attendants take over, and there is a night watch, and the palace doesn't really sleep. But your part of it is done. Sir William nods at you, you bow, you withdraw. The corridor outside the Privy Chamber is quiet at this hour. The traffic that filled it during the day is thinned to occasional figures moving purposefully between the parts of the palace that operate at night. A page with a message, a physician heading somewhere, the night groom who will sleep in the antechamber making his way to his post. You walk back to your room. The corridor is cold. The torches have been replaced with fresh ones, but they're still not warm. The stone walls exhale the accumulated chill of an October day that never quite warmed up and is now returning the cold to the air freely and without apology. Your room is cold. You sit on the edge of your bed and take off your shoes, and for a moment you just sit there, your feet on the cold floor, your hands on your knees, and you let yourself be a person who is tired. Not visibly tired. You are alone. No one is watching. But the habit of composure is deep enough now that you don't drop it entirely even in private. You just let the weight of the day settle onto your shoulders for a moment and acknowledge it. You are here, in Hampton Court, in 1536, in the court of Henry VIII, 3 feet from the most dangerous man in England for most of your waking hours, in a position that men would pay £700 to get near, and you have it. And you have it because you're nobody in particular from a cold place in the north, and because you happen to know a man who happened to know Sir William, and you have not yet made a serious error. And the king said you were learning. That is where you are. You lie down. The straw crackles. The cold finds its way under your blanket within minutes, the same as every night, patient and persistent. You close your eyes. The palace settles around you. The sounds of it at night are different from the sounds of it during the day, lower, more intermittent, punctuated by silences long enough to hear the wind against the outer walls. Someone somewhere is playing music, something soft and unrecognizable, a lute maybe, coming from a room 2 floors below. A cart on the service road outside, the slow progress of something heavy being moved. You think about the king looking at his dead garden. You think about the precise depth of Cromwell's bow. You think about Robert Carey's hands not quite steady for 2 weeks. You think about Sir William saying, "Be precise," and then you sleep. The weeks that follow are a continuation of the same day, varied enough to stay interesting, consistent enough to learn from. Each morning the same, the darkness, the cold floor, the 7 minutes, and each day different in the way that days in a place this complex and this populated are always different, which is to say different in the specific people and events while remaining consistent in the underlying texture of it, the fundamental nature of what this place is and what it requires of you. You learn the palace properly in these weeks. You've had 4 months of learning the Privy Chamber and the corridors immediately adjacent to it, but now Sir William sends you farther on errands that are partly genuine errands, and partly, you come to understand, a deliberate expansion of your knowledge of the space. He wants you to know Hampton Court the way he knows it, in your feet and your hands, not just your head. The kitchens are below and vast. You go there twice on business, once for a specific preparation that the king's physician has requested, once to deliver a message to the master cook from Sir William, and both times you stand at the threshold for a moment longer than strictly necessary, because the kitchens of Hampton Court are one of the most extraordinary things you've encountered since you left the north. 6 great fireplaces, each one burning continuously, each one attended by men who tend it the way sailors tend a ship's rigging, with constant vigilance and immediate response to change. The heat in that room is extraordinary, a physical force that hits you at the door and pushes back against you. The air shimmering slightly above the hearths, the noise of it, the crack and roar of fire, the clatter of pots and dishes, the rhythmic thud of cutting and chopping, the voices of the cooks calling to their assistants in a language that is specific to that room, a vocabulary of food and fire that you only partly understand. The smell. The smell in the royal kitchens is the concentrated essence of everything that might be cooked at once. Meat in all its stages from raw to roasted, bread just pulled from the oven and bread still rising, sauces in their pots, spices that have travelled from places you've only heard of, the sweet alcohol smell of wine being reduced, the sharper smell of vinegar. It is overwhelming and not unpleasant, the opposite of the more complex smells upstairs, a direct animal satisfaction. Men work here who will never in their lives see the Privy Chamber. Men who have been in these kitchens since they were 12 years old, and who know every detail of this space with the same intimacy that you're developing for the rooms above. The hierarchy here is its own thing. The master cook with his staff, the undercooks, the scullery boys, the men who do nothing but turn the spits for hours at a time, the skin of their faces permanently reddened from the radiant heat. They look at your blue velvet doublet and know exactly what it means and where you've come from, and most of them look away again quickly. And one of the undercooks, a woman of 40, broad and confident, the kind of competence that takes the form of physical certainty, just looks at you with an assessment so direct and thorough that it takes you a moment to recover from it. "The physic preparation," she says. "It'll be ready at 2:30. Tell Sir William." "Thank you." She nods and turns back to what she was doing, which is something involving a piece of meat and a quantity of herbs that she handles with the same precise efficiency that Sir William uses to handle the King's morning. You take the message back upstairs and you think about competence, about how it looks the same in different rooms, about how the woman in the kitchen and Sir William in the Privy Chamber are doing versions of the same thing, just with different materials and different audiences and profoundly different consequences if they get it wrong. Then there's an evening when you see something that shifts the nature of things. It's late November. You've been here 7 months. The court has moved to Whitehall for a period, which is a different palace with different geography and different acoustics and the same essential dynamics, the same circles of access, the same morning rituals in rooms that smell slightly different from Hampton Court but carry the same weight. You're in the outer anteroom waiting when you hear it. The raised voice is not Henry's. That would be immediately recognisable and would require an entirely different response. It's a male voice, younger, coming from behind a door that leads to a secondary corridor used mainly by the council staff. A voice that starts controlled and then loses control quickly, the way voices do when fear tips into fury. You don't move toward it. You don't need to. The words come through the door with sufficient clarity. Told nothing, which means he knew nothing, which means... And then another voice, lower, more controlled, stopping him. A short silence. The door opens and 2 men come through it. One of them you recognise, a member of Cromwell's office staff, a man of 30 who has worked in Cromwell's household for years and who you have seen a dozen times without ever speaking to. The other man is young, maybe your age, dressed well, but not as well as he perhaps thinks, and his face is doing something complicated. They see you. They both see you in the same way. The way that men who have been saying things they shouldn't have been saying see someone unexpectedly in a corridor. That moment of calculation, of rapid, invisible assessment of what you heard and what you'll do with it. The Cromwell man's assessment takes perhaps a half second and concludes. His face settles. The younger man is still calculating. "Gentlemen," the Cromwell man says, not your name, just the word, acknowledging your status and simultaneously not acknowledging your person. "Cold evening." "Bitter," you say. He nods. They walk on. The younger man glances back at you once before they turn the corner. You stand where you are for a moment. You have heard something. You don't know what it means. You could probably with effort find out more about it. The court of Henry VIII is full of men who traffic in information and who would give you context in exchange for what you just heard. You don't do that. You do what you always do with what you hear in this palace. You file it away in the place where it belongs, behind a door in the interior that has no handle on the outside, and you continue to wait for the king to need something. This, you're coming to understand, is the discipline that makes the difference, not intelligence. There are men in this court more intelligent than you, not charm. There are men far more charming, not birth. You've seen men of much better birth fail here in ways that were spectacular and complete. The discipline, the capacity to hear a thing and hold it and not use it unless and until there is a legitimate reason, which there mostly isn't. the capacity to be trusted with information because you will treat it as information, not as currency. It is the hardest thing about this job, harder than the hours, harder than the standing, harder than performing composure when what you feel is something else entirely. Information is power, and you are surrounded by information all day, every day, marinating in it, swimming in it, and the correct response to it is to leave it exactly where it is, to touch it as little as possible, to neither exploit it nor advertise your knowledge of it. Sir William, on the day you asked him about it directly, you asked him directly, which was bold and also necessary, because there are some things you can only learn by asking, said this: the king knows everything that happens in his court, not through spies, not only through spies. He knows it the way a man knows his own house in the dark, by feel. He knows which of his men hear things and do nothing with them, and he knows which of his men hear things and trade them. The first kind he trusts, the second kind he watches, and when the second kind has become inconvenient, he uses what he knows about them against them. Because a man who trades information has no secrets, because he traded them. He had looked at you with those careful grey eyes. You understand. You understood. You filed it away. December. December at court is Advent and the preparations for Christmas, which the king takes seriously as a religious observation, and even more seriously as an opportunity for display. The court transforms over the course of these weeks. The ordinary daily life of it continues. The morning rituals, the council meetings, the endless commerce of petitions and appointments and negotiations. But layered over all of it is the gathering momentum of the season, the arrival of additional entertainers and musicians, and the expansion of the household as relatives and additional courtiers come to court for the Christmas festivities. The privy chamber fills with the particular smell of December. Greenery brought in and placed in the royal rooms, the waxy smell of holly, and the sweeter, darker smell of ivy, and underneath it all the richer smoke of fires built bigger against the cold. The tapestries go up, the winter ones, heavier and warmer in colour, showing scenes of indoor life and hunting in snow. The candlelight is different in December, more of it and more golden, the palace making itself beautiful against the dark. The king in December is, on his better days, more like the king you imagined before you arrived. Not the large, dangerous man who had spoken a name with an edge in his voice in October, not the silent figure staring at a dead garden. Henry in his better December moments is the man who was once called the finest prince in Christendom. The man who dances and sings and tells stories and fills a room with a kind of warmth that has nothing to do with the fires, who laughs at a joke with his whole body, who can be generous, who can be charming, who can make the person he is speaking to feel for a moment like the only person in the world who matters. He is also, in December, still entirely capable of being the other version of himself, and the two versions live in the same body and switch with a speed that keeps every man in his court in a state of constant calibration. You learn the transition. You learn to read it the way you learn to read the weather, which is never perfectly predictable, but which has patterns and tendencies and early signs if you know what to look for. The quality of the silence, the set of the shoulders, the particular way his right hand moves when something is troubling him, a slight tapping motion against his thigh that is so brief and controlled that it's barely visible, but it's there. On the days when you see it, you adjust. Less movement, quieter. The minimal, necessary version of whatever task is at hand. No conversation beyond what is absolutely required. And for God's sake, Nothing that might read as either judgment or excessive solicitude, because both are wrong. Both register on the king's internal gauge as something requiring a response, and the last thing anyone in the privy chamber wants is to be the thing that causes the king to respond. Christmas Eve, the palace glittering and roaring with celebration, the great hall packed with people in their finest, the entertainment running through the evening in waves of music and performance, and the elaborate Christmas revels that Henry still, at 44, participates in with a pleasure that is genuine even when it is also ceremonial. The king is in a good mood. A real good mood, not the performed version. You can tell because the smile reaches his eyes, because the laugh when it comes is not calculated, because he speaks to the people around him with a directness that has no edge under it. You are standing in your position near the wall of the presence chamber, watching the evening progress with the half of your attention that can watch it while the other half remains focused on its actual job of being available. And you notice something. Edward Seymour across the room is watching the king, just watching, steadily, with the expression of a man who is thinking very hard about something that he hasn't figured out yet. Measuring the distance, maybe, the temperature of the room, the wind direction of the king's favour, the specific question of where he stands and where he needs to get to. He is ambitious. The king said that. Men should be careful. Seymour doesn't look careful. He looks intelligent, which is different, and he looks confident, which is different still, and none of those things are quite the same as careful. And in this court, in this year, careful is the one that matters most. You watch him for a moment and then you look away. Not your problem, not your business. You are Edmund Neville, gentleman of the Privy Chamber, and your business is to be useful to the king, and to be precise, and to be nowhere near whatever is happening between Edward Seymour and Thomas Cromwell, which is a thing that is going to happen in its own way, in its own time, and that you cannot influence and do not want to influence, and would be very foolish to be seen influencing. The music plays, the torches burn, the king laughs, you stand. January of the next year comes in cold and hard, frost on the inside of the window glass every morning, the Thames frozen far enough out that the watermen are grumbling about business. Hampton Court is warmer than most of London. The fireplaces are more numerous and better supplied with wood, and the tapestries do their job of keeping the cold off the stone. But the cold is still there, still finding every crack in the fabric of the building, still seeping up through the floors in the early mornings before the fires take hold. Your 8th month. And it is in January, on a grey morning with ice on the windows and the smell of snow in the air that hasn't yet fallen, that Sir William calls you in to speak with him privately for the first time. His own room is spare, not ascetically spare. The furniture is good. The fireplace is working. There are books on a table by the window and a rug on the floor of the kind that keeps cold from travelling up through the soles of your feet while you stand, but without the personal accumulation you might expect from a man who has lived in this palace for 11 years. A man who knows, perhaps, that in this palace the definition of your things is provisional. Sit down. You sit. A relief, actually. You're tired and you won't show it. But the offer of a chair from Sir William is unusual enough that you accept it without pretending not to need it. He looks at you across the table. "The king spoke to me about you," he says. "You wait. He asked me 3 questions. The first, were you discreet? The second, were you capable of expanding your responsibilities? The third..." Sir William pauses. "He asked me if I thought you were trustworthy." A silence. "What did you tell him?" you ask. "I told him yes to all 3. That is what I believed then." It remains what I believe. He looks at you steadily. I want to know if I was right. This is a test with only one correct answer, and the correct answer is not the obvious one, which would be to immediately affirm that yes, he was right absolutely without question. The correct answer is more complicated. I believe you were right, you say. I cannot guarantee it because I don't know what I haven't yet been tested on. But in everything I have done in this position, I have tried to be worthy of it. He nods very slightly. I am recommending you for elevation to Groom of the Stool when I retire, he says. The room is very quiet. Your heart is doing the thing again that you control immediately. When do you? Spring. Perhaps summer. My knees have given me notice. A dry expression crosses his face, the closest thing to humour that Sir William typically displays. The king is aware. He has been aware for some time. He has been watching you the way he watches everything, which is to say constantly without appearing to. You think about the mornings, about the king's pale blue eyes in the early light, about the eggshells and the napkins and the morning walks and the small conversations, about Cromwell's bow and Edward Seymour's ambition, and Robert Carey's steady hands that weren't quite steady. I understand, you say. I doubt you fully understand yet, Sir William says without unkindness. But you will. He stands. The interview is over. One thing, he says as you stand to go. The last man who held the position before me, you've heard his name. You have. You've heard it mentioned in the careful way that certain names at court are mentioned. We understood the access, Sir William says. He did not understand the discipline. He mistook the king's intimacy for friendship. He began to make decisions on the king's behalf without being asked to make them. A pause. Where is he now? Gone, you say. Gone, Sir William agrees. Not dead, just gone, which is in its own way a mercy and also a message. He looks at you one last time. Be precise, he says. The same words as before, but carrying more weight now, carrying a future. You nod. You leave. The corridor is cold. Your feet know the way back to the Privy Chamber. Your mind is somewhere else entirely, or trying to be, and you pull it back because this is not the moment for it. This is not the moment for imagining what comes next or what it means or what it will require of you. This is the moment for the corridor, for the cold, for the next thing. One foot and then the other. The door of the Privy Chamber. Your hand on the handle and then inside into the warmth, into the light, into the fire and the tapestries and the particular smell of this room that you will know. You realize for the rest of your life that you could wake from a dream and smell it and know exactly where you are and exactly what is required of you. The king is at his table. He looks up briefly as you enter. The eyes, the assessment. He looks back down. You take your position. You are present. You are ready. You want nothing except to be useful. That is the job. That is actually the job. And you are, you think, with the careful precision of a young man from Northumberland who's been in this palace for 8 months and has not yet made a serious error, beginning to be good at it. This is the part where, if you are still awake, I need you to do something for me. Stop trying to hold all of this together. Stop tracking the names, the dates, the political manoeuvring. You don't need any of it right now. What you have is warmth. You have a blanket and a pillow and the particular peace of knowing that tonight's business is done. You've navigated everything today that needed navigating, and whatever tomorrow requires is tomorrow's problem. You are not Edmund Neville right now. You are you, in your bed, in your time. But listen for a moment to the thing that is the same, the cold outside the window, That's the same, not the same cold, not the same palace, but the same basic fact of warmth inside and cold outside, of a body that has worked hard settling into the rest it's earned. The same, the sounds, the house settling, the ambient noise of wherever you are, traffic or wind or a neighbour's television or just the breath of the building around you. All of it is just the palace at night in a different key, different instruments, same piece. The tiredness in your body, that doesn't change across the centuries. The shoulders that held themselves straight all day, the feet that carried you, the face that performed whatever version of composure your life requires. All of it now finally allowed to let go. Your face can do whatever it wants. Nobody is watching. The performance is over. This is the thing Edmund Neville felt in the dark of his room in Hampton Court in 1537, under his blanket on his straw mattress with his shoes set beside the bed and his good blue doublet hung on the peg, and the cold finding its way around the edges of everything with its patient, impartial energy. He was tired. He was warm enough. He had done the day correctly. It was enough. In 3 months he would be Groom of the Stool to the King of England. In 8 years Henry would be dead and the job would change with the new king. In 20 years he would be an old man who had outlasted Cromwell and Seymour and most of the men he'd known in those early years at court, who had survived through some combination of luck and precision and the discipline of not wanting things too visibly. But he didn't know any of that yet. He just knew the tiredness and the cold and the warmth that was holding the cold back, and that was enough for one night. It's enough for tonight too. Let everything settle. Your back, which has been carrying the day, can put it down now. Let it sink into whatever you're lying on and stay there. It doesn't have to hold anything anymore. Your hands, which have been doing things all day, holding things, working things, carrying the invisible weight of all the small tasks and decisions, they can open now, not holding, not gripping, just open your face. All the things it's been doing, let it stop. The sounds around you, traffic, wind, someone somewhere, the building breathing, all of it is just the night doing its work. Nothing to track, nothing to navigate. The cold outside is taken care of. You are warm. Whatever is between you and the cold, blanket, walls, distance, is doing its job without your help, has been doing it this whole time, will continue without your involvement. You don't need to manage it. You don't need to manage anything right now. The centuries between you and Hampton Court are full of people who went to sleep and woke up and did the day again. Millions of them. Billions, each one finding the same thing at the end, that the body wants to stop, that the mind can be persuaded to follow, that there is this territory between waking and sleeping where everything becomes simple in the way that nothing else is simple. Spring comes to Hampton Court the way it always comes, not announced, not sudden, but as an accumulation of small evidence. The frost stops forming on the inside of the window glass. The quality of the light through the Privy chamber windows changes, the pale winter grey gaining a warmth that is almost imperceptible on any given day, but that you notice over the course of a week, the room looking less like itself under a cold spell and more like itself in full operation. The smell of the river changes, losing the mineral flatness of frozen water, gaining something more complex and more alive, the particular working smell of the Thames in motion, and the gardens begin again. You see this on the morning walks, the formal beds that were bare and brown in October and November, and the grey months that followed, now showing the first tentative green at their edges. the herbs putting out new growth cautiously, as though not quite convinced the cold is finished. The topiary creatures look less austere. The paths between the beds, swept clear by the gardeners each morning, show the lighter colour of ground that is warming up. The king walks more in spring. The leg is always worse in cold weather. Something in the cold that aggravates whatever is happening in the wound, that makes the joint stiffen, and the whole mechanism of walking require more of a deliberate act of will than it should. In spring the leg is still there, is always there, will be there until the end, but it cooperates better. Henry walks faster. He walks farther. On good days he moves through his garden with something approaching the energy of the man who used to run these same paths after a deer 30 years ago, and on those days the court takes a collective breath, and the men around him relax in ways that are visible only to other men who know what tense looks like when it's hidden. You're 8 months in, and then 9, and then 10, and the months have started to do what months do when a place becomes genuinely familiar, which is to blur at the edges, to lose the sharp definition that newness gives to everything. You know Hampton Court. You know Whitehall, where the court has been twice for stretches. You know the faces and the names and the patterns of behaviour of the 24 people who form the permanent inner world of the Privy Chamber, and you know, somewhat less well but well enough, the wider cast of the court itself, the several hundred men and women whose orbits are close enough to the centre to matter. You know the king's morning the way you know how to breathe, not thinking about it, just doing it. Sir William watches you with the particular attention of a man who is evaluating for a specific purpose, and the specific purpose has been named, and is now hanging in the air between the two of you in every interaction, unspoken but present, like a piece of furniture that's been moved to a new position in a room, and that you both navigate around without commenting on. Spring is when it happens, not in the way you expected it to happen, which is to say not with ceremony. Sir William does not come to you with an announcement. There is no formal moment. There is instead a morning in late April when he calls you in before the day's work begins and says, with the efficiency of a man who is prepared for this, and knows what he wants to say and sees no reason to elongate it, "Today you will take the morning duties. I'll be in the outer room if something requires attention." And that is that. You open the door to the king's bedroom for the first time as its primary attendant. The smell is the same. The room is the same. The king is in the same position he is always in, propped against his bolsters, the morning assessing light in his pale blue eyes. And yet everything is different. 'Cause this morning the responsibility sits with you, the decisions, the trivial seeming decisions that are not trivial, about when to move and when to stay still, what to offer and when to wait, how much of your own presence to bring into the room and how much to suppress. Those decisions are yours now. Sir William in the outer room means Sir William is not making them. You are. "Neville," the king says. "Your Majesty." A pause. The king looks at you with the full weight of that assessment, and you stand in it, your hands at your sides, your face arranged in present attention, and you look back at him with what you hope is exactly the right quality of readiness. "Where's Sir William?" "He's asked me to attend this morning, Your Majesty." A silence. "Has he?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Henry looks at you for a moment longer, testing something in his own head, comparing what he sees against whatever private catalogue he has been building over the months of watching you. "The water," he says. You move. The water is where it always is. The basin, the cloth, the temperature correct, the cloth folded the right way, the basin presented at the right angle. He takes the cloth, presses it to his face. The room is quiet. He hands it back. You take it. Move to the next thing. Your hands are steady. You know this the way you know things that your body does when you have prepared yourself properly and trust the preparation, not because you've checked them, but because you haven't needed to. If they were shaking, you would know. They are not shaking. Good morning to you too, Edmund. Well done. Keep going. The morning proceeds. Sir William comes into the room once, quietly, to observe something specific. You don't know what he's observing. You're not looking at him. You're looking at the task at hand, and then withdraws again. He makes no sound. He registers no opinion. An hour later, when the king is dressed and settled and a message has been sent to Cromwell, and the morning is well established in its proper shape, Sir William comes to stand beside you in the antechamber and says nothing for a moment. You wait. Well done, he says. 2 words. Brief as everything Sir William says. They are nonetheless the 2 words you needed to hear. He has gone from the Privy Chamber by summer. Not dramatically gone. He remains at court, in a lesser capacity, a courtesy position that gives him apartments and a stipend and a presence at the major ceremonial events. He is there when you see him in the corridors or at the larger communal meals, and he nods at you with the distant approval of a teacher who has finished teaching and is watching what was learned take on its own life. And you are the groom of the Stool to Henry VIII. The formal appointment comes through the proper channels, a document with the proper seals, and you read your own name on it and fold it and put it away and go back to work, which is the correct response to it, and also the only response you are capable of, because the document naming you to the position is the least interesting thing about the position. The interesting things are happening in the room 20 feet from where you're standing. What the position actually is, in its fullness, is something you spend the summer discovering. Not because Sir William didn't explain it, but because the difference between explanation and experience is the difference between being told about the cold and putting your feet on the stone floor. The access. The access is the thing. You hold the key to the Privy Chamber. Physically hold it. A large iron key on a ring that you carry when you're on duty that gives you the right to enter and the right, thus the power, to grant or deny that entry to everyone else. Men who want to see the king must go through proper channels, must be announced, must wait. But the Privy Chamber key is, in miniature, the key to everything, because the Privy Chamber is where the king actually is, and everything else is management of access to that fact. Cromwell has the right of entry. Edward Seymour does not yet, not to the Privy Chamber itself. The Lord Chancellor has it. The Archbishop of Canterbury has it. A handful of other men whose names and titles represent the outer architecture of Henry's government. Everyone else comes to you first. This is not stated loudly. It doesn't need to be stated at all. Men know. The men who want something from the king know that the path to the king runs through the rooms adjacent to him, and the rooms adjacent to him are managed by the groom of the stool, and the groom of the stool is you. The first time a man approaches you with something other than a legitimate request, the first time you can clearly identify the conversation for what it is, someone feeling out whether you can be useful to them in a particular way. You are in the long gallery at Whitehall, walking with no particular purpose, and the man who falls into step beside you is someone you know by name and family connection, but have not spoken to privately before. He is the nephew of a bishop. He is perhaps 35, well-dressed, pleasant-faced, with the smooth manner of someone who has spent his adult life in the proximity of important men and has learned from it. He speaks about nothing for 30 seconds. The weather, the news from the north, Something about a hunting party the king attended 2 days ago. Then, without any transition that you can identify as a transition. My uncle has a matter of some delicacy he would like to lay before the king's attention when an appropriate moment arises. You walk. The proper channel for petitions, you begin. Of course. He's prepared the proper documentation. It's more the question of timing. The matter is, as I said, delicate. He would be grateful to know if there is a moment when His Majesty might be receptive to such a matter. Silence for several steps. I can be of no assistance with that, you say. Your voice is even, your pace is unchanged. The King's schedule is managed through the Lord Chamberlain's office. I'd suggest your uncle contact them. The nephew walks beside you for a moment longer, apparently considering whether there's more to be said, and then concludes there isn't. Of course, he says again. Thank you. He peels off and goes wherever he was actually going. You walk on. You think about Sir William's words, the second kind he watches, the kind who trades information, and also about £700, because here is the truth, the one that nobody states directly, and that you've been arriving at slowly over the months of being in this position. The currency you hold is real. The access you control, the ability to time a conversation, or position a moment, or simply not prevent someone from being heard. These things have value, extraordinary value, the kind of value that in a different man, a man with fewer of Sir William's lessons under his skin, could be converted into actual money, into positions for family members, into advancement of a specific kind. You could be very wealthy. You think about it, honestly. You think about it the way a person should think about it, which is fully and without flinching, because the danger of not thinking about it is that you begin to do it accidentally. A small favour here and another one there, each one seemingly insignificant, until the accumulation becomes something with a name and a consequence. You think about it, and you decide, with the same clarity that you bring to every morning in the Privy Chamber, that you will not. Not because you are certain you would never be tempted, not because you are morally superior to the men who do it, but because Sir William was right, and because you are precise, and because precision means knowing the difference between what you can do and what you should do, and choosing the second one every time without exception, even on the days when the exception seems harmless. This is your one real resource, the only thing you own, absolutely, your reliability. And you are not going to trade it, not for any amount. Summer proper arrives and the court moves the way it always moves in summer, not to escape the heat exactly, though Hampton Court is cooler than Whitehall in July. But in the rhythm of the King's progress, the annual movement through the country that is both practical and political, the King being seen, the King demonstrating ownership of the land by moving through it. The progress in 1537 is shorter than some years. The Queen is pregnant, confirmed and announced in April, and this changes the calculus of movement. Jane Seymour travels with the court, but with more care than would otherwise be taken. Fewer miles each day, better accommodations at each stopping point, the Queen's physicians more prominent in the household's arrangement than they would normally be. The pregnancy has transformed the atmosphere of the court in ways that you watch with the attentive neutrality that is your constant occupation. The transformation is partly relief. The court has been waiting for this, has been waiting for it since Jane became queen, since the terrible business of the previous year, which everyone refers to obliquely and carefully, and which settled over Hampton Court like a cold fog that only this news has begun to lift. A male heir would end a particular kind of anxiety. would create a future, would make the enormous disruption of the last decade, the break with Rome, the executions, the dissolution, all of it, feel like it had been towards something rather than simply through something. Everyone is very careful with their hope. Hope is a fragile thing in the court of Henry VIII, and everyone here is old enough to know it. You are careful with yours too. But in the quiet moments, the morning walks when the king is in good humour, the evenings when the summer light holds long and gold through the western windows of the Privy Chamber, and the day's business is done and the king is settled, you let yourself feel something like peace. The small peace of a person who is where they should be, doing what they're capable of doing, in a world that is, for the moment, more stable than it has been. There is a morning in July. You will remember this morning for the rest of your life, and not for the reason you might expect. Nothing dramatic happens, no announcement, no great event. It is simply a morning walk similar to every other morning walk in the kitchen gardens at Hampton Court, which are slightly cooler and quieter than the formal gardens, and which the king has taken to visiting in summer because the smell of them pleases him. The herbs in their beds, rosemary and sage and lavender and thyme, the warmth of the morning sun pulling the oils out of the leaves so that the air is saturated with it. Something that is like medicine and food and pleasure all at once. The king stops at a row of lavender. He doesn't say anything. He just stops and looks at it. A long row of purple flowers at their peak, buzzing with bees that pay no attention to the King of England and his attendant, being bees and having better things to think about. Henry reaches out and brushes his hand along the top of the flowers. Slowly. The bees adjust but don't leave. The smell intensifies. Lavender oil released by the touch. You stand 3 feet behind him. He is 45 years old. His kingdom has cost him things that cannot be calculated. He's standing in his kitchen garden in July looking at a row of lavender. "My mother," he says, not looking at you, not looking at anything except the flowers, "had lavender in her garden at Richmond. I remember it from when I was very small. You say nothing, you know not to speak into this." "She died when I was 11, he says, a pause. "I've been king longer than I had a mother." He seems to consider this, the way a man considers an arithmetic problem that has an answer he already knew but is only now truly grasping. Strange. The bees work the flowers. He drops his hand and turns and walks on, and you fall into step behind him, and the subject is closed. But you carry it. You carry it not as information, not as something to be categorized or used or traded, but as the most private thing you know about any human being. This man, this king, this enormous, dangerous, complicated force that has been reshaping England for 3 decades, stood in his kitchen garden on a July morning and told you about his mother. He told you because you are safe, because the room that moves with you, the invisible privy chamber of your discretion, is the only place in England where the King of England can say what he is thinking without it being recorded and repeated and interpreted and used. This is the job. This is the real job underneath all the other things that the job is. You are the place where the king can be a person, and you will keep that. You will keep it as you keep everything that happens in the Privy Chamber, locked away, untouched, belonging only to itself. You walk back through the kitchen garden in the July sun. The lavender buzzes behind you. August brings trouble. Not catastrophic trouble. Not the kind that the court has learned to recognize as its worst face. Not executions or investigations or the particular political weather that precedes a major purge. It is smaller trouble. The kind that matters anyway. It begins, as many things in this court begin, with a piece of information. A man called Davenport, not someone you know well, a middle-level position in the outer household, comptroller of something or other, competent, unremarkable, the kind of man who slides through court without attaching much attention to himself, has been talking. Not treasonously, not in any way that would bring him to the block, but talking, sharing, with a cousin in the merchant tailors, details about the king's health that he should not have shared, details that he had assembled from fragments and conversations overheard in corridors, and the one time he was admitted to the presence chamber for a specific purpose, and saw, apparently, more than he should have. You learn this through Robert Carey, who has a gift for knowing these things before they become official knowledge, which is itself a skill worth studying. Carey tells you on a Tuesday evening quietly, in the gentleman's room while everyone else is either at supper or elsewhere, and what he tells you is this, that Cromwell knows about Davenport, that the investigation has been conducted, that Davenport has been spoken to, and that the matter will be resolved quietly. Quietly is the important word. What quietly means, in this context, is that Davenport will leave the court, not arrested, not charged, not tried, simply gone. His position will be given to someone else, and the position itself will continue as though Davenport had never occupied it, and Davenport will return to whatever part of England he came from, and he will not come back, and he will know every day for the rest of his life how close the edge was, and that he stepped off it only far enough to be caught, but not far enough to fall all the way. This is Henry's court managing itself. The king knows, or will know, or perhaps already knows and has delegated the resolution. The machinery has processed the violation and produced a result. You listen to Carey tell you this. Why are you telling me, you ask? Carey looks at you with something patient in his face, the patience of a man explaining something to someone who already knows it. Because Davenport's cousin in the merchant tailors has a relationship with the man who supplies a particular thing to the Privy Chamber household, and that relationship means that the information Davenport shared didn't stay with his cousin. It moved. A pause. How far? Not far enough to matter, yet. Carey's hands are steady tonight, you note. Whatever was troubling him earlier in the year has either resolved or settled into something he's learned to manage. But the pipeline that information travelled through, that pipeline runs close to things that are your responsibility. You understand him. He's telling you that someone in the outer periphery of your world is a weak point, not treasonous, not deliberately feeding information to Davenport or anyone like him, just permeable, the way some people are permeable, unable to quite contain what they know, letting it seep outward at the edges without full awareness of what they're doing. Who, you say? He tells you. It's a young man, one of the lower positions, a page of sorts, who has been in the household for 8 months, and who has the particular quality of inexperience that manifests as enthusiasm, talking too much, wanting to be interesting to people, not yet understanding that in this court, interesting information is a liability. You think about yourself 8 months in, about the things you didn't understand yet. The following morning, before the day properly begins, you speak to the young man, not in front of anyone, not in a way that has a formal character. You find him in the corridor, going about something ordinary, and you fall into step beside him the way the bishop's nephew fell into step beside you, and you speak for perhaps 90 seconds, and what you say is simple, delivered without emphasis or drama, in exactly the tone of Sir William explaining something for the first time. He goes pale. You finish what you have to say and walk on. That afternoon you check, then the day after. The pipeline, as Carey called it, stops carrying anything in the wrong direction. The young man has heard you. He has heard you not because you frightened him. You specifically did not frighten him, because frightened people behave unpredictably, but because you told him clearly what was required and what the alternative was, and the alternative was not something he wanted. Davenport is gone by the end of the week. The machinery continues. You are managing it now, or a portion of it. You had not thought of it that way before, had thought of yourself as existing within a system rather than operating one, but the distinction turns out to be less clear than it seemed from the beginning. The Privy Chamber is a system. It has inputs and outputs and feedback mechanisms, and the groom of the stool is the person who keeps it running, not the king. The king is the reason for the system. You are the person who makes sure the system doesn't break. Sir William made this look effortless. It is not effortless, but it is, you are discovering, possible. September arrives with the smell of harvest and the particular quality of early autumn light that is both beautiful and melancholy, the quality of an afternoon that knows it won't last. The Queen's pregnancy is well advanced now, visible, the subject of cautious celebration in the court. The physicians are optimistic. The king is quiet in his optimism, the kind of quiet that comes from a man who has hoped for this before and lost it, who cannot afford to want it too openly because the wanting is itself a vulnerability. You see it in him, in the morning quiet, in the way he looks sometimes at the Queen during the formal public moments of their day together, a look that contains more than any document ever will. October 4th is the day that changes everything, not the 4th specifically. It is the night of the 4th into the 5th, when the child is born. You're not in the room. The birth is attended by the Queen's ladies and the physicians, and not by you. Your access to the royal private rooms does not extend to the Queen's chambers, which is its own world with its own protocols. But you are in the Privy Chamber waiting, because the Privy Chamber is always staffed when something this significant is happening, and the king is awake in the room beyond, and he will need something the moment news arrives, and you will be there. The waiting is its own thing. You have learned to wait, are good at waiting, but this waiting has a different texture from the ordinary waiting that is your daily life. This waiting has stakes visible to everyone. The weight of 20 years of disruption and planning and sacrifice sitting in the air of the room with you. The sound of a door opening somewhere in the distant architecture of the palace. Then another, then footsteps, quickening. The message arrives. You're not the first person to hear it. It comes through the Queen's household, through her Lord Chamberlain, moving along the proper channels. But you hear it very quickly because the proper channels lead here. Edward, a boy, a healthy boy, you breathe. The door to the king's room opens and you hear Henry, who has been alone in there, which was his choice, which tells you everything, make a sound, not a word, just a sound. The sound of a man setting down something that has been very, very heavy for a very long time. You close your eyes for half a second. Then you go back to work, because there is work to do, because an enormous amount needs to happen in the next hour, and you are the person who makes sure it happens correctly. You will remember that half second, but you won't speak of it, ever. The court transforms in the following days in ways that are different from any other transformation you've witnessed. Not the anxious excitement of the Christmas season, not the political weather shifting that follows a council crisis. Something more fundamental, more joyful, and also, as it turns out, more fragile. 12 days. 12 days from the birth of the prince to the death of the queen. Jane Seymour dies on October 24th, 1537. You know she is ill before it is publicly acknowledged, because you are close enough to know these things. The physicians who attend her speak in the particular careful language of men who are managing information while managing medicine, which is to say they say as little as possible about as much as they know, and what they know is not good. The birth was difficult. The recovery has not proceeded as it should. The fever that set in on the third day has not broken. The court watches. The court has watched queens before. It knows what watching queens means. On the morning of the 24th, the king comes to the privy chamber looking like a man who has not slept in 3 days, which is because he has not slept in 3 days, which you know because you've seen him each morning and the evidence is accumulated without comment. The eyes underlaid with shadows, the particular heaviness of a man carrying something in the body that the body doesn't know how to put down. You pour the water, you hand him the cloth. He presses it to his face for a moment longer than usual. He hands it back. You take it. You say nothing. There is nothing to say. There is nothing that could be said by you or anyone that would touch what is happening to this man in this moment, and the discipline of your position, which you have learned in your bones, says clearly, your job right now is to be perfectly, invisibly, undemandingly present, and to require nothing from him, not even acknowledgement. He eats nothing that morning. He drinks the wine. He looks at the fire for a long time. "Leave me," he says. You leave. He closes the door. You stand in the anteroom and you breathe, and Robert Carey is there, and James is there, and none of you say anything to each other, and the morning passes in the strange suspended time of waiting for something that is already inevitable. The news comes at midday. In the months that follow, you learn something about grief that you did not know before. You learn it not because you are grieving. You are not. You did not know Jane Seymour, and what you are is something more ambient. The sadness of proximity, the way grief radiates from its source. But because you spend those months in the daily presence of a man who is, Henry's grief is private in the way that everything that happens in the privy chamber is private. He does not weep in front of you. He does not speak of it directly. What he does is exist each morning with a quality of silence that is different from his other silences, heavier and more still, and you adapt to it the way water adapts to the shape of whatever contains it, without losing your own nature. He wears black. He will wear black for months. The court wears black. The prince lives. Edward, tiny and fierce and astonishing, tended by his nurses in his separate nursery, separated from the court by the practical protocols of infant care, is the reason for everything and the living proof that Jane Seymour's death was not entirely without purpose, which is a terrible thing to think and which everyone at court is thinking. You think it too. Then you correct yourself. Her death was without purpose. Deaths are without purpose. What survives them and goes on is not the purpose of the death, but the pure stubbornness of life, which is different. You learn this too in those months. You learn it standing in the privy chamber while the king works through his grief, the way strong men work through things, by continuing, by making himself get up in the morning and have the water and put on the doublet and receive Cromwell and sign the documents, by insisting through action that the world continue despite the loss. This is a form of courage you had not expected to witness. You witness it. You witness it, and you say nothing, and you hold the napkin, and you keep the privy chamber running, and you do your job, which is to be there. Winter comes again, your second winter. The frost returns to the window glass. The Thames freezes again, not as solidly as the year before, but enough that they talk of a frost fair, and then conclude against it when the ice proves thin in places. Hampton Court smells of the same pine branches and beeswax and holly, the same deep fire warmth of the seasonal rooms, the same candles in the same holders, and the different candles that are lit for the prince's nursery now, in the wing where a small piece of the future is being kept carefully warm and alive. You have been here 18 months. The time has stopped doing the thing it did in the beginning, where it felt long and significant and each day was identifiable as its own thing. The days now are themselves and also a rhythm, a pattern, the city of your expertise built up brick by brick until you move through it without looking at your feet. You are good at this. You are, if you are honest with yourself in the private moments before sleep, very good at this. And being good at it has changed you in ways you are still discovering. The way your body moves through corridors has changed, not with arrogance. Arrogance in this court is a fast death, but with a certainty that is barely visible, and that you nevertheless feel in your own muscles. The way you read rooms has changed. The capacity you've built for sitting with information, holding it, not acting on it, not trading it, that capacity has grown into something that feels almost like a physical organ, a new sense that operates continuously and without effort. There is a March morning when you are in the long gallery at Hampton Court. You are alone, or nearly alone. A page at the far end doing something with a window, and the morning light is coming in at the angle that March morning light comes in, that particular clear cold light that is stronger than winter, but has not yet softened into the gentleness of full spring, and you stop walking for a moment and just stand in it. The gallery looks down the length of Hampton Court's east wing. The windows on the south side look out over the formal gardens, and you can see the first green returning to the beds, the tentative repeat of last year's spring, the topiary animals emerging from their winter austerity, back into something approaching their designed shapes. Beyond the garden, the river. Beyond the river, fields and roads, and very distantly the smudge of London smoke on the horizon. You came from somewhere north of that horizon, a place that feels, standing here, extremely far away and not entirely real, as though it might have been a story someone told you about a person who no longer exists. The boy from Northumberland who flinched at cold floors and didn't know how to hold a napkin. You know how to hold a napkin. You know a great deal more than that. You think about what you know, not as inventory, not in the way of a man counting his assets, but in the way of a person trying to understand what kind of person they have become. You know how a king sounds at 6 a.m. and how to tell from that sound what kind of day it will be. You know which men in the court of Henry VIII are fundamentally trustworthy and which ones are not, and which ones are trustworthy in the specific circumstances of their own interest and no further. You know the smell of a healing wound and the smell of one that isn't healing. You know what it looks like when a large and powerful man who has always been told he can have anything sets himself to grieve for something he cannot get back. You know what it costs to maintain composure for 18 months in the proximity of absolute power. Robert Carey was right. It costs something real. It costs it every day, not in catastrophic installments, but in the small, steady withdrawal of a man who is always watching, always calculating, always performing a version of himself that is the version this job requires. You have not lost yourself, but you have been reshaped. The person looking out over these gardens at Hampton Court on a March morning in 1538 is not the person who walked down a corridor at Hampton Court 18 months ago, with his hands slightly cold and his heart doing embarrassing things, and his face arranged in an expression he'd been practicing in the dark. He is someone who has learned. A sound from further down the gallery and you turn, and it is Cromwell. Thomas Cromwell, walking with two of his men, carrying a sheaf of documents under one arm, moving with his usual efficient pace. He sees you. He nods, the brief, calibrated nod of a man who knows exactly who you are and what that means and is acknowledging both without needing to say anything about either. You nod back, and then he has passed you, moving on toward wherever he is going, and you are alone again in the March light. Cromwell, who will be gone in 2 years, who will end up on the Tower Hill on a July morning in 1540, convicted of treason and heresy, executed with a headsman who needed 3 strokes to complete the work. This is the end of the most powerful man in England short of the king himself, and it is coming, and no one in this gallery in March of 1538 knows it, and you do not know it. And if you did know it, you would probably not be any more able to save him than anyone else will be. That is the nature of this court. That is the thing that sits underneath all the other things. You turn back to the window, the gardens, the river, the distant smoke, England and everything it contains, and the particular piece of it that you occupy. You are the groom of the Stool to Henry VIII. You've lasted 18 months. In the scheme of this court's history, 18 months is enough to learn that lasting is the thing, and that lasting requires everything Sir William said, and that everything Sir William said was correct. You will last longer. You will be precise. You will be trusted. You will stand at the centre of the most powerful court in England, in the most intimate position available, and you will hold what you're given and refuse what you're offered, and do the job every morning, from the cold floor to the napkin to the long afternoon of standing, and the evening wind down and the walk back to your room, and the cold again, and the straw, and the sleep. You will do it because it is yours, and because it is the only thing worth doing with the accident of being here, in this palace, in this life, at this moment in history. You turn from the window and walk back toward the Privy Chamber. The gallery is long and cold and beautiful. Your steps are quiet on the rushes. You know the way by heart. So let me tell you something, before we go to sleep. The thing about the groom of the Stool, the thing that makes this particular job stranger than it first appears and more meaningful than its most obvious description, is that it lasted. As an institution, as a role, as a piece of the English royal household, it continued for 300 years after Edmund Neville walked those corridors. The exact duties changed, the intimacies changed, the nature of the monarchy changed, but the essential thing, the fact of someone whose specific job was to be with the monarch in the most private moments, whose access was total, and whose discretion was absolute, that persisted. Because it solved a real problem, the problem of power and isolation, the problem of what it means to be a person in a role that requires you to be something more than a person at all times, in all public spaces, in front of all observers. The Privy Chamber was the place where you got to be human, and the groom of the Stool was the person who held that space. There is something in that is still recognisable, not in the specific form. We don't live in palaces, most of us. We don't stand in antechambers waiting for kings to wake. But the human need that the institution served, to have someone who knows the worst and most intimate things about you and simply continues, who witnesses your weakness without using it, who gives you the privacy of your own face in a difficult moment. That need does not go away. It might be what you need right now. Not a groom of the stool, not a man in blue velvet with an iron key. Just the knowledge that whatever this day contained, the things you performed, the things you managed, the version of yourself you had to be in every room you walked through, you don't have to perform it anymore. This room is your privy chamber, this dark, this quiet. No one is assessing you. No one is taking notes. Whatever your face wants to do, it can do. Whatever weight you've been carrying, the small accumulation of it, the daily toll of being present and capable and watchful, you can put it down here, right here, in this bed, in this moment. It doesn't need you to keep holding it. Let it go. Feel the heaviness of it leaving your shoulders, the gradual, almost reluctant release of muscles that have been doing a job they've done all day and are done with. Shoulders, the upper back, the jaw, which holds more tension than you usually realize until you let it unclench, and then it releases and you feel the difference, and it is significant. Let your hands open. If they've been closed, holding something even in sleep, they don't need to be. Nothing to hold right now, nothing to carry. Just the weight of your own hands, which is actually very light, lighter than it feels when they're working. Your feet, all that standing and walking, they've done everything they needed to do today. The cold floors and the corridors and the steps. Done now. Let them be still. The sounds around you, whatever your particular version of the palace sounds like at night. The traffic that is always somewhere. The building settling into its own weight. The wind maybe, depending on where you are and what season. All of it is just the machinery of the world running itself, not requiring anything from you, proceeding perfectly well without your involvement. You are not needed right now. That is the gift of sleep. That is the one time the day gives you where nothing is waiting for your attention, where you can simply be, in the most minimal sense of that word, just a body using the dark and the warmth and the horizontal to replenish itself. Let that happen. The thoughts that are still moving, still trying to find something to think about, still running the day's events back through themselves looking for errors or opportunities, let them slow. They're doing it out of habit, not out of necessity. The day is done. The errors that were made are made. The opportunities that were taken are taken. There is nothing productive happening in that review, and it knows it, and if you stop engaging with it, it will stop on its own. Stop engaging with it. Let it move like water with nowhere particular to go, just meandering, losing momentum, spreading out thin and slow, and finally stopping. The warmth. You are warm. Whatever is keeping you warm is doing its job. Blanket or duvet, or the warmth of the person beside you, or simply the accumulated warmth of a body that generates heat and is now keeping it. That warmth is yours. It's already there. You don't have to make it happen. Just be in it. The dark, the particular quality of dark that exists behind closed eyes, which is not quite black, is it? It's more textured than that. Has its own colours and movements if you watch it, which you probably shouldn't, because watching it keeps you awake. Just let it be there, behind your eyes, soft and present and not demanding anything. Centuries of people lying down in the dark after long days and letting this happen. Edmund Neville in his room at Hampton Court with his cold floor and his careful life. The cook in the kitchen below with her red face and her precise hands. The link boy probably somewhere in the city after his shift of lighting the way for strangers through dark streets. All of them finding the same edge, the same territory, the same surrender. It's the same territory you're in right now, the edge, you're on it. The thoughts are slower now, much slower. The quality of them has changed, becoming less purposeful, more imagistic, more like the beginning of something dreamed than the continuation of something thought. This is the transition. This is the crossing. You don't need to do anything about it. It's happening already. Edmund Neville, in his room in Hampton Court in the year 1538, with the cold outside and the warmth inside and the sounds of the palace settling into its nighttime self around him, he felt this, exactly this, the slow withdrawal of the day, the body releasing its occupation, the mind finally consenting to stop. He had done the day correctly. He had been present and useful and discreet. He had held what he was given. He had refused what should be refused. He had been precise. And now, having been precise all day, he got to stop. You get to stop. The warmth, the dark, the sounds, very far away now. The breath, which is already longer and slower than it was 10 minutes ago, which knows what's coming and is preparing without being told. The body, which is heavier than it was, pleasantly heavier, the particular density of a person who is letting everything settle into the surface beneath them instead of holding it up. This, just this, nothing required, nothing owed. The day will come back. Tomorrow it will come back, same as it always does, and there will be cold floors and morning light and the whole elaborate, beautiful, difficult performance of being alive in the particular life you have. There will be things to manage and people to navigate and some version of the long discipline that is the cost of being present in the world. But not now, not for hours yet. Right now there is just this edge and the warmth and the dark that is getting softer around the edges the way it does when sleep is very close, when the boundary is very thin. Cross it. Just cross it. Let the last of the waking go. Let sleep have you, the way it had Edmund Neville in his room in Hampton Court, the way it has every tired person who has ever lay down in the dark and finally stopped fighting it. You've earned this, the rest is yours. Good night.